Welcome back to True Echo, where real stories echo louder than fiction. In today's episode, we follow the heartbreaking journey of a young black girl named Amara, left in the care of those who were supposed to protect her, but who instead betrayed her in the most twisted way. When her billionaire father returns early from a business trip, a single moment changes everything. Stay until the end, you won't believe how it all unravels. The winter sky loomed gray over the Carter estate like a warning no one could hear. Massive gates framed the property, vines of iron curling like the claws of a giant beast, and beyond them, the mansion stood in solemn elegance. Clean lines, high glass windows, and walls built not just with stone but with legacy. Ulysses Carter didn't just own the house, he earned every inch of it. A black man in a city that still clung to old ghosts, Ulysses had risen through the grit of systemic rejection, surviving every locked boardroom door until they had no choice but to open. From the balcony that overlooked the estate's back garden, he often stood in silence, not to admire the wealth, but to remember the war it took to get here. Beneath him, the snow had just begun to fall, brushing over the hedges like powdered sugar. His 8-year-old daughter, Amara, had left footprints in the frost earlier, chasing the ghost of her mother's laugh through the yard. Now inside, she sat quietly with a book twice her size, her dark curls falling over her round cheeks, fingers tracing the page instead of reading it. Her mother's photo lay beside her on the velvet armrest. Amara never left it far from reach. Ulysses walked past the library and paused in the hallway, his phone pressed to his ear, murmuring over a multi-million-dollar logistics deal that needed final review. Even as the numbers and negotiations filled his mind, his eyes softened when he looked toward his daughter. But time was short. The jet was fueled. His assistant had already loaded the briefcase and confirmed the meetings. The month ahead would be relentless. "Daddy?" Amara's voice was barely a whisper. She didn't need to say more. Ulysses turned and crouched, opening his arms. She ran into them without hesitation, burying her face into his chest. "I want to come with you," she said again, her words more plea than demand. He didn't lie. He just softened the truth. "It's just business, pumpkin. Lots of talking, long hours. You'd be bored stiff." Then came the promise she wanted to believe, "It's only a few weeks." Behind them, Martha the housekeeper stood in the shadow of the kitchen archway, watching with a strange smile. Her apron looked freshly ironed, her hair tucked into a tight bun. When Ulysses stood to leave, she stepped forward. "We'll take excellent care of her, Mr. Carter," Martha chimed sweetly. "Frank and I both." He gave a tight nod, unaware of the cold calculation behind her eyes. Frank, already waiting by the car with the door open, grinned too widely, too confidently. Their teenage son, Eric, lingered at the staircase, his eyes on Amara with something unspoken behind them, not curiosity, not friendship. Something else. The plane lifted off that night under the cover of a thick snowfall. The next morning, the house changed. At first, it was subtle. Martha's tone, still sweet, became clipped. Breakfast arrived late, and there was only one waffle on the plate. "Sorry, sweetie," Martha said, setting it before Eric and glancing at Amara with practiced concern. "We just ran out of batter." Amara looked down at her empty plate. She wasn't used to questioning adults. But her stomach twisted. Eric smirked, shoveling syrup-soaked bites into his mouth. The second day, her favorite books vanished from her room. On the third, Martha found her curled up in the playroom and said, "Eric needs space to grow. You don't mind moving your toys, right? Sharing is what good girls do." At school, it got worse. Frank, now driving the kids to the elite academy in Ulysses' luxury sedan, made offhand remarks that pierced deeper than Amara understood. "Be smart, little lady," he said one morning in the rear view. "People might think you're lucky to even be in a car like this. If they ask, say Eric's the boss's son. Keeps it simple." Amara stared at the reflection of his smirking face in the mirror. "But I'm his daughter," she whispered. "Sure you are," Frank said, laughing as he pulled into the drop-off lane. "And I'm Santa Claus." Rumors spread like rot. Eric leaned into the lie with ease. He strutted through the halls with borrowed confidence, murmuring stories that Ulysses had taken him in as his own blood, that Amara was just a favor to the late wife, a girl who'd be sent away soon. Kids believed what they wanted. The bullies came next. Amara didn't fight. She didn't cry. She shrank, learned to disappear in plain sight. At home, her room shrank too. Her clothes, lost in the wash, her meals laced with allergens her father had warned them about, peanut butter on toast, spicy seafood dishes. "Oops," Martha said, feigning concern. So hard to keep up with all these rules. In the corners of the house, Amara clung to shadows. Only one light remained, Mavis, the old housekeeper. Her limbs were frail, her joints stiff, but her memory sharp. Her heart unbreakable. Each night, she crept into Amara's room with a bowl of warm soup and whispered lullabies only her mother used to sing. And yet, Ulysses was blind to it all. Martha's daily reports were filled with concern. "She's quiet, withdrawn," she'd say. "We try our best, but maybe she's still grieving. It must be so hard without her mother." The word struck home. Ulysses' guilt silenced his doubts. Until one night. The frost crept thick across the windows that night, curling like delicate fingers over the panes of Amara's bedroom. She lay curled up in bed, arms wrapped tightly around the fading photo of her mother, her stomach empty, her cheeks still damp from quiet tears. Downstairs, the mansion bustled, not with warmth, but with a strange and growing tension. Frank had brought home beer. Eric had taken over the media room. And Martha? She paraded through the halls like a queen in stolen robes, humming tunelessly as she wore one of Ulysses' late wife's silk scarves like a trophy around her neck. Amara stayed quiet. But Mavis didn't. She watched from the edge of every room, watched as Amara was ignored at dinner, as Martha forced her to scrub bathroom tiles, as Frank muttered darkly under his breath whenever Amara crossed the hall. She noticed the bruises, the exhaustion, the hollow look in the child's eyes that only someone who had truly known joy could recognize as its absence. And that night, when Amara's plate was taken before she even finished her meal, and Frank laughed when Eric said, "She eats like a stray dog," Mavis decided enough was enough. The old rotary phone in the pantry hadn't rung in years. Most of the staff didn't even realize it still worked. But Mavis had been here long before cell phones, before marble floors, before the second kitchen was built. And she remembered the number, Ulysses' private line, etched into memory from a promise made long ago. "If anything ever happens to my child, you call me, Mavis. No matter what." Her hands trembled as she dialed. It rang once. Twice. On the third, it picked up. "Mavis?" His voice was breathless, uncertain, then sharper. "Is everything okay?" "No," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "No, my boy. It's not." She told him everything. Not in screams or sobs, but in the quiet, broken voice of someone who had waited too long to speak. She described Martha's cruelty, Frank's manipulation, the rumors, the bruises, the hunger. She even described Eric, the smirking boy who stole Amara's toys, who mimicked her father's mannerisms and planted seeds of doubt in every hallway of the estate. Ulysses didn't interrupt. But his silence thundered. When she finished, there was only one word from him. "Stay with her." The line clicked. Across the world, Ulysses Carter canceled a $500 million deal in a single phone call, ordered his jet prepped, and disappeared from the Tokyo skyline before the morning sun could touch it. Back at the mansion, Mavis moved like a ghost through the halls, stealing warmth for Amara, wrapping her in every blanket she could find, whispering, "Hold on, baby girl. He's coming." But by dawn, the nightmare had deepened. Martha had found the photo, Amara's most prized possession, crumpled beside her bed. She blamed Amara for littering. Then, with a smile more venom than mirth, she grabbed the little girl by the wrist and dragged her toward the front door. You like to act like a princess? Let's see how royalty handles the cold. The wind outside was merciless. Snow had fallen all night, covering the grounds in icy silence. Amara was shoved out onto the stone front patio in nothing but thin pajamas. The cold hit her like a slap. Her teeth chattered instantly. Her feet were bare. Behind her, the door stayed open, just long enough for Frank and Eric to watch. She needs discipline, Martha said, sipping coffee on the porch. Entitlement comes from being coddled. Eric snickered. Frank muttered something about putting her in her place. Amara didn't cry. Not when Martha dumped a bucket of icy water over her head. Not when her fingers turned red and her knees trembled. Not even when Eric shouted, "Maybe it'll lighten her skin," and laughed like it was a punchline. But then something changed. A low, steady growl broke through the winter stillness. The sound of tires rolling over ice. A sleek, black Mercedes glided into the driveway like a shadow coming home. Its door opened slowly, deliberately. And Ulysses Carter stepped out. He didn't speak. He didn't move quickly. But the air changed. Martha froze. Frank went pale. Even Eric stopped chewing mid-bite, his cookie half raised to his mouth. Ulysses walked through the snow like it wasn't even there. His eyes were locked on one thing, the little girl standing in the freezing cold, her curls soaked, her skin raw, her fingers clenched around a photograph she'd refused to let go. Amara's legs buckled when she saw him. He caught her before she fell. She didn't say a word, just collapsed into his arms. And that's when everything changed. Ulysses carried her inside, past Martha, past Frank, past the staff who stood frozen in doorways and corners, holding their breath. He handed her to Mavis with a whisper, "Warm bath. Softest blanket. Whatever she needs." Then he turned. He faced them. All of them. But especially Martha and Frank. His words were quiet. Measured. "Pack your things." Frank's laugh cracked nervously. You don't understand. We were just." "I understand perfectly," Ulysses interrupted, his voice like gravel sliding across stone. "I trusted you. You hurt my child. You fed your son lies. You walked through this house like it was yours." Martha tried tears. "Please. Ulysses, we only wanted out," he snapped. By midnight. They didn't move. He stepped forward. And for the first time, they believed him. Midnight couldn't come fast enough. Frank and Martha scrambled through the guest quarters in a frantic mess of open suitcases, torn dresses, and scattered toiletries. The air, once saturated with their fake charm and entitlement, now reeked of panic. Eric sat stiffly on the edge of the bed, stunned for the first time in weeks. Gone was the cocky boy who had strutted down the halls like a prince in waiting. In his place sat a child caught in the collapse of a house of lies. Ulysses didn't raise his voice again that night. He didn't need to. His silence screamed. Every footstep he took echoed with the authority of a man who had built his kingdom from nothing, and who had no hesitation tearing down anything that threatened it. The staff who had once tiptoed around Martha's snide comments now moved freely, openly, following Ulysses' every order. Loyalty returned like breath to lungs after drowning. Amara, meanwhile, was wrapped in soft towels in her room upstairs, gently rocked in Mavis's arms. Her body shook from the cold, but her eyes began to clear as the warmth returned to her bones. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she believed she was safe. Still, she hadn't spoken a word since the snow. Downstairs, Ulysses sat in the den, elbows resting on his knees, his fingers steepled. The fireplace cracked and hissed beside him, but he barely noticed the heat. His mind raced, not just with rage, but with shame. Shame that he had missed it all. That he had let them inside. That he had ignored the signs Amara tried so hard to hide. He thought of every report Martha gave him. Every time Frank's words seemed off. Every meal that seemed slightly different when he wasn't around. He should have known. But the businessman in him, the strategist, wasn't done. Vengeance wasn't enough. There had to be justice. So while Martha cried upstairs and Frank cursed under his breath as he shoved his fake driver's license and cheap watch into a bag, Ulysses was already on the phone with his lawyer. Then the head of security. Then his private investigator. By morning, the Carter estate would no longer be a sanctuary for snakes. At 11:47 p.m., the Miller family was escorted to the gate by private security. Not with violence. Not with chaos. Just with cold efficiency. Their belongings were tossed into the back of Frank's aging truck. Ulysses didn't watch them leave. He was upstairs, sitting beside his daughter's bed, brushing the curls from her forehead as she finally fell asleep under layers of quilts. But the next day was reckoning. News broke like a thunderclap. Ulysses' team worked overnight to uncover the truth. Fraud. Identity theft. Bank transfers hidden beneath petty cash expenses. Frank had been siphoning funds for months. Small amounts at first. Then bolder moves, signed contracts, invoices falsified under the Carter estate's name. Even worse, the private investigator found video footage from the security cameras, footage of Amara on the porch, Martha with the bucket, Frank standing by laughing. The footage wasn't just damning. It was horrifying. Ulysses didn't leak it directly. That wasn't his style. But the right people saw it. By noon, Frank's mugshot appeared on local news stations. Embezzlement. Child endangerment. Unauthorized access to financial accounts. His smiling, smug face now framed with red headlines and booking numbers. Martha. She wasn't charged, but the public fallout was swift. She'd taken selfies inside the mansion, boasted to her old friends in private Facebook groups about living the rich life, and shared Amara's private belongings in posts dripping with passive-aggressive cruelty. Those screenshots surfaced within hours. Even Eric, the golden child of their scheme, faced repercussions. Expelled from the private academy by the end of the week. Every student had seen the footage. The story was viral. There was no coming back from that. Meanwhile, the Carter estate went quiet. No chaos. No press statements. No interviews. Just quiet healing. Ulysses made a simple rule: no more lies, no more distance. He cleared his schedule for the rest of the quarter. No flights. No board meetings. Just breakfast with Amara. Walks through the garden. Reading together at night like her mother used to. The mansion, once shadowed by betrayal, slowly filled again with light. Still, Amara took time. She flinched when footsteps were too loud. She hesitated before answering questions, as if afraid her words might cost her something. But Ulysses was patient. Steady. Present. One morning, she sat across from him in the sunroom, her small hands gripping a mug of warm cocoa. He watched her quietly, waiting, not pressing, just holding space. And then she said it. "Why didn't you see?" The words were so soft, they nearly disappeared beneath the hum of the heater. Ulysses closed his eyes. "I didn't want to," he said truthfully. "I was busy. Distracted. But that's not an excuse." She looked down, swirling her cocoa with the spoon. "They said you'd forget me. That I was just a problem." He reached across the table, gently taking her hand. "You're not a problem, Amara. You're the reason everything I built means anything." Her lip trembled. "But they said you loved Eric more." His grip tightened slightly. "They lied. And I believed them for too long. But I promise you this, I will never let anyone do that again. Ever. Her shoulders relaxed. A tear rolled down her cheek. And this time, she didn't wipe it away alone. The snow began to melt. Dripping slowly from the eaves, forming delicate rivulets down the sides of the Grand Carter estate, as if the house itself was weeping out the last traces of a season it would never forget. Inside, things were changing too. There was no dramatic overhaul, no sudden transformation. Just little things. Real things. Like the way Amara smiled now, cautiously, like a bloom testing sunlight. Or the way Ulysses lingered longer in the hallways, standing outside her door just to hear the sound of her breathing at night. He had learned the hard way that power didn't come from presence alone, it came from care. From vigilance. From love. Mavis, who had always been the quiet backbone of the home, was now front and center. She refused any reward. She declined Ulysses' offer to retire with full pension and a villa in Palm Springs. I started with this family, she said one morning as she stirred Amara's oatmeal at the stove, and I'll finish with it. But things weren't just healing inside the mansion. They were reverberating outside of it, too. The footage of Frank and Martha's abuse had gone further than Ulysses expected. The story was picked up by national outlets, another shocking betrayal in Billionaire's mansion, headline, another talking point for the evening anchors. But something rare happened in the chaos. People listened. The image of a little black girl, barefoot in the snow, shivering with a photo of her late mother in her hands, that struck something deeper than gossip. It sparked outrage. It sparked empathy. It sparked reflection. Ulysses was flooded with letters. Messages. Donations for children's shelters in Amara's name. Stories from people who had gone through something similar, who had been silenced in homes they didn't control, gaslit by those they trusted. It wasn't all healing, though. The school's principal had called, frantic, offering public apologies, begging Ulysses not to sue for the blind eye turned toward the bullying and lies. He didn't sue. He did something worse. He bought the school. The paperwork moved quickly. His lawyers worked in silence. 1 week after the call, Ulysses owned controlling interest in the institution. The board was replaced within 48 hours. Every teacher who failed to report Amara's bruises. Gone. He didn't hold a press conference. He held a parent assembly. He walked in with Amara by his side, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes cold and clear. No threats. No anger. Just truth. She's not a charity case. She's my daughter. And if any of you had asked instead of whispered, you'd know that. Silence. Guilt. But more importantly, change. Afterward, as Amara walked through the halls of her school, things were different. The stares were still there, but not mocking. Curious. Respectful. The same students who used to mock her now stepped aside. Some even apologized. And Eric? Word had it he was enrolled in a public school several states away, living in a cheap apartment with his mother, both of them fading into obscurity where lies didn't stretch far. But Ulysses didn't care about revenge anymore. He cared about restoration. One Saturday morning, he took Amara back to the garden, the one she used to run through when her mother was alive. The roses were still dormant under the frost, but the soil was softening. Mom planted those, Amara said, pointing to the hydrangeas. She did, Ulysses replied, kneeling beside her. Said they were like you. Quiet. But when they bloom, everybody stops to look. Amara blushed. Her fingers traced the edge of one branch. I thought I lost you, she said suddenly. Like Mom. The words hit Ulysses in the chest like a punch. He turned to her, kneeling, taking her face gently in both hands. You never will, he said. Even if the whole world burns down. I'll still be there, finding a way back to you. She nodded, eyes misty. And then, for the first time since it all happened, she leaned into his chest, not with fear, not with uncertainty, but with full, unquestioning trust. In that garden, beneath the fading snow, father and daughter sat together on the earth that had once grown love and would grow it again. The scars would remain. But so would the truth. And sometimes, truth was all you needed to build something stronger. Spring came early to the Carter estate. The snow melted into the soil like it had somewhere better to be, and the sun filtered through the glass windows with a warmth that hadn't visited the house in months. New flowers pushed through the thawing ground in the garden. Amara now tended herself, small green sprouts that didn't care who had stepped on them before. They just grew anyway. Inside, life had begun to stitch itself back together in ways no one dared hope. Amara's laughter returned in pieces, first a smile at Mavis's silly songs, then a giggle when Ulysses burned pancakes trying to make breakfast like her mom used to. There was still hesitation behind her eyes sometimes, a flinch if someone raised their voice too quickly, but her shoulders didn't hunch as much. Her gaze didn't stay on the floor. And her voice, though soft, held confidence again. But Ulysses hadn't let go of the past. Not completely. Not when so many questions still gnawed at him. Why had no one said anything? Why had the staff, many of whom he'd paid generously for years, turned their eyes away while his daughter was being humiliated under his roof? The answer came quietly, through a letter left on his desk. Unsigned. But the handwriting was familiar. We were scared. Frank said you'd fired the last chef who questioned the housekeeper. He said he was in charge. And, we believed him. I should have protected her. I didn't. I'm sorry. It was humbling. And infuriating. Fear was a powerful weapon. One Frank wielded well. One Ulysses vowed never again to allow inside his home. He summoned the entire household staff that evening, not to punish, not to scold, but to speak. I don't just pay you to keep the lights on, he said, standing at the head of the long dining room table where a dozen staff members sat, some of them shaking. I trusted you. My daughter trusted you. And when it mattered most, you went quiet. The silence in the room was thick. But I also know this, silence is something people learn when they've been hurt before. And I won't be the kind of man who teaches that silence again. He paused, scanning their faces. So if you want to stay in this house, if you want to work here, you speak up. You protect each other. And most importantly, you protect her. He nodded toward the doorway. Amara stood there, her small frame silhouetted in the golden light. Every head turned. No one looked away this time. She stepped forward slowly, and to everyone's surprise, she spoke. I forgive you, she said. But if it ever happens again, I won't be quiet next time. It was a promise. One that echoed far louder than Ulysses' voice ever could. After that, things shifted. The chef started leaving sweet notes in Amara's lunchbox, jokes, riddles, sometimes just a smiley face drawn in chocolate syrup on her plate. The gardener planted a new hydrangea bush and named it Amara's Bloom. Even the security team, once stern and silent, started learning her favorite music to play in the car when they drove her to school. The house became a home again. But outside that home, the story wasn't over. Frank had vanished from the headlines quickly. That's how it worked with stories about the rich. The news cycle moved on, people forgot, and only those left behind carried the scars. But Ulysses hadn't forgotten. Nor forgiven. He didn't need revenge. He needed understanding. So he hired someone. Not a lawyer this time. A therapist. Not just for Amara, but for himself. For the household. For the future. Because trauma didn't just leave bruises, it left blind spots. And the only way to stop it from returning was to face it in full daylight. Their first family therapy session was awkward. Ulysses sat stiffly on the edge of a velvet couch, arms crossed, while Amara clung to a stuffed bear. But slowly, walls came down. "I thought you wouldn't believe me," Amara said one day. "That you'd choose them." Ulysses' jaw clenched. "I did believe them," he admitted. "Because I didn't want to believe anything else. That's on me." "But you came back," she whispered. "And that's what saved me." The therapist nodded. "Sometimes, coming back is harder than staying." It was a strange form of healing, not loud or cinematic, but honest. Painful. Necessary. And every time Amara opened up, Ulysses felt something inside him shatter, and then rebuild stronger. He had spent years constructing a fortress for his daughter: money, prestige, gates. But it took just one crack, one trusted family inside the walls, for it all to come tumbling down. Now he knew better. Now he was building something else. Not a fortress. A foundation. The seasons continued to turn. By summer, the Carter estate was blooming with color and life again. The hydrangeas Amara planted in early spring had taken root beautifully, just like she had. Her curls were longer now, her shoulders straighter. She'd grown a little taller, too. But it wasn't the kind of growth you measured with a pencil against a doorframe. It was strength. It was clarity. One Saturday morning, as she played soft piano notes in the music room, one of the few places she'd always felt safe, Ulysses sat in the hallway just outside the door, quietly listening. The melody was gentle, hesitant, like a child walking barefoot over glass. But it didn't break. She didn't stop. Mavis brought them tea later and left without a word. She didn't want to interrupt the peace that had finally returned. Later that day, Ulysses received a letter. Not from a lawyer. From Eric. The envelope was wrinkled, the handwriting unmistakably a child's, though he wasn't much younger than Amara. Inside, a single sheet of lined paper, no return address. "I didn't know what they were doing at first. But then I liked it. Being important. Being you. I didn't think it would hurt her. I see now. We lost everything. I missed the garden. I missed the movies in the theater room. But I don't miss pretending. I'm sorry. I don't expect you to write back." Ulysses stared at the paper for a long time. He didn't show it to Amara, not yet. Not because he didn't believe in forgiveness, but because he believed in timing. Amara's healing wasn't something to be rushed. She deserved to bloom at her own pace. But the letter stayed tucked in his drawer, beneath her drawings, beside the photograph of his late wife, the same photo Amara had clutched through the cold. The one that refused to fade, no matter what it endured. And life went on. Amara's school life improved tenfold. Not because of fear, or Ulysses' power, but because people had changed. Her teacher started involving her more, asking for her opinion during class debates. Students who once mocked her now waited for her answers before deciding their own. She wasn't pitted, she was respected. She even made a new friend. Her name was Sadie. Freckles, braces, always humming some song that hadn't even hit the charts yet. But she didn't care about the money, or the story, or even the mansion. The first time she came over for a sleepover, she'd looked up at the house and said, "Cool. But do you have cookies?" That made Amara laugh for a full minute straight. But even as things settled, the lesson remained. Ulysses made changes, not just at home, but across his empire. New vetting procedures for household staff. Mental wellness programs for employees. Policies that prioritized not just efficiency, but empathy. He became known not just as a billionaire businessman, but as a protector. Someone who had almost lost everything, and rebuilt it stronger. One evening, he and Amara sat under the stars on the back patio, a blanket wrapped around them both, a cup of cocoa in each hand. "Do you think they ever really cared?" Amara asked, her voice almost swallowed by the wind. "Martha and Frank?" She nodded. He didn't answer right away. He looked up at the stars, then down at his daughter's profile. She looked so much like her mother it hurt sometimes. I think they cared about themselves, he said finally. And sometimes, people like that use kindness as a tool. Not as a gift. She thought for a long time before replying. That's why it didn't feel right. He glanced at her. What do you mean? Even when they smiled, it didn't feel warm. It felt like waiting. Like they were waiting for me to do something wrong. Ulysses nodded slowly. Your heart knew. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Will I ever forget it? She whispered. No, he said. But it won't hurt forever. And for a while, they just sat there, watching the sky. The world didn't stop spinning. Bad things would still happen. People would still lie, cheat, hurt others. But Amara knew now that she wasn't powerless. That her voice mattered. That silence wasn't safety, it was a weapon used by those who wanted control. And Ulysses? He knew that love required more than provision. It required presence. It required vigilance. And when that failed, it required the courage to admit your failure, to return, and to fight. Not just for justice. But for truth. Because truth, once seen, couldn't be unseen. The end of summer arrived with golden light and long shadows. The Carter estate no longer echoed with the icy silence that had once swallowed its halls. Instead, it thrummed softly with life. The staff moved about with renewed purpose, not with fear, but with belonging. The walls bore new paintings, many of them Amara's, framed proudly like the art of a master. Her piano playing filled the house each morning, a melody that never repeated but always healed. One afternoon, as the breeze drifted through the open windows and laughter carried from the kitchen, Ulysses stood quietly in his study, gazing at a photo on the mantel, his wife, holding Amara as a baby. The woman's smile was sunlight. It had been years since her passing, but he could still feel her voice in his ear, protect her the way you protect me. And he had failed, once. But not again. Behind him, Mavis entered, slower now, her cane tapping rhythmically across the wood floor. She's come through it, you know, she said gently. He turned to her. Because of you. Mavis shook her head. Because of herself. That little girl's got iron in her soul. All we did was remind her not to bury it. Ulysses smiled, the kind of smile that pulled from the depths of a man who had learned how fragile peace was. I don't know how I ever let them fool me. Mavis chuckled. Because they were good at playing quiet. Evil doesn't always scream, Ulysses. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it holds the door and wears a smile. That night, Ulysses sat Amara down and showed her the letter from Eric. She read it twice, eyes scanning slowly, lips moving silently. When she finished, she didn't speak. Just sat there, holding the page in her lap. Do you hate him? She asked eventually. No, Ulysses said. But I hate what he allowed himself to become. Amara nodded. Do you think I should forgive him? He hesitated. Only if you want to. Not because you're supposed to. She folded the letter and slid it back across the table. I don't think I'm ready yet. That's okay. They left it at that. Because healing doesn't always end in forgiveness. Sometimes it just means letting go of the rope that's been burning your hands. The weeks that followed were full of small but powerful victories. Amara entered a local storytelling competition at school, something unthinkable months ago. Her piece, titled When Silence Screamed, brought the audience to their feet. She didn't name names. She didn't need to. The truth was in her tone, in her poise, in the strength of a child who had been silenced and survived. Ulysses was in the front row, eyes misting as the applause thundered around them. Afterward, the school's headmaster approached, overwhelmed. She's extraordinary, he stammered. She always was, Ulysses replied. You just never looked close enough. That same week, Ulysses received a call from a major network producer. They wanted to adapt Amara's story into a docuseries. National exposure. Television specials. Profiles. Features. He declined. Some stories weren't meant to be sold. They were meant to be lived, and protected. Instead, Ulysses chose something else. Something real. He established the Carter Foundation for Youth Protection and Advocacy, aimed at creating safe reporting systems for children in private homes, elite schools, and domestic staff environments, spaces where abuse often hid in plain sight. It wasn't a vanity project. It was a promise. And Amara? She became the quiet heart of the initiative. Not as a figurehead. Not as a victim. But as a survivor. At the launch ceremony, standing behind the podium in a crisp navy dress and braided hair, she leaned into the mic and said just one sentence. Even when you're little, your voice can be big enough to change everything. The crowd fell silent. Then roared. And somewhere in that crowd, sitting quietly in the back row in a borrowed suit, was a young boy with nervous eyes. Eric. He didn't approach her afterward. He didn't dare. But he clapped longer than anyone else in the room. Back home, as twilight bled across the sky, Amara stood on the mansion's balcony, staring out at the garden. The hydrangeas had bloomed again, soft lavender petals, wide and full. The same shade her mother loved. Ulysses stepped beside her. "You remember what I told you last year?" he asked. She nodded. "That flowers like me don't bloom fast. But when they do, everyone notices." She smiled. And for the first time in a long time, there was no hesitation in it. No sadness hidden beneath it. Only light. Because Amara Carter, the girl once forced into the cold by those who wore false smiles, had found her place in the sun. And she would never again be hidden by the shadows of someone else's greed. Not as long as she had her name. Not as long as she had her voice. Not as long as she had the father who finally came home, and never left again. What we allow in silence often speaks the loudest. This story reminds us that justice sometimes begins with a single voice, a quiet truth, and the courage to return and make things right. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to True Echo for more powerful, inspiring, and thought-provoking narratives. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Amara's shoes? And most importantly, share this video to make sure voices like hers are never silenced again.